Before I share a few words about this week's Torah portion, I want to read the opening line from last week's. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Even if you don't know Hebrew, you still probably could pick up on two key words there. Adonai, God, and Moshe, Moses. To fill out the rest, God spoke to Moses and said. As far as opening lines go, this one is not the strongest hook, at least not if you are familiar with Torah. I'll tell you what I mean. If we look at next week's Torah portion, the opening line is, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Now, if you have had a bat mitzvah or a bar mitzvah, there is a good chance you read a line like Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. It comes up a lot. Which brings us, finally, to this week's Torah portion. Ve'ata tetzaveh et b'nei Yisrael. You shall command the children of Israel. Again, even if you don't know Hebrew, you can probably tell the two key words, God and Moses, they're both missing. Now, God is mentioned in the second verse of the Torah portion, but Moses, that is a different story. Moses' name is not brought up in the second verse, or the third, or the fourth. No, Moses' name isn't mentioned once in the entire Torah portion. So you may be wondering, is that unusual? Now, most of us don't read Torah with a little notepad keeping track of key words as they come and go. But fortunately, we are part of a long tradition of scholars and sages who absolutely did. And their work leads to this rather fascinating bit of biblical trivia. Now, Moses' name first appears in the first portion of the book of Exodus. If you count up all of the Torah portions from the start of Exodus to the very end of the Torah, Deuteronomy, it comes to 42 portions. Moses' name is mentioned in every one of them, except for one. An interesting observation, but then comes the question, why? Our tradition offers a number of theories. Now, just a word on that. There is no way we will ever know the real reason Moses isn't mentioned. A personal story. Sometime last year, I received a few emails after a service asking if I had chosen not to wear my tallis during that particular Shabbat because I was making a statement about the gravity of the pandemic, or if it was because of a Jewish tradition during the period of counting the Omer. All good theories. But of course, there was a different reason I was not wearing a tallis on that Shabbat. I forgot. I share the story as a reminder that there is not always a reason, or at least not a good reason, for why things are the way they are. So if that's the case, why consider the possibilities if they are all likely to be wrong? It's not because it will reveal the truth. That is likely impossible. But because it is a window into the mind of the commentator and what that person values and understands as the meaning of Torah. So what do the commentators say about this omission? The Vilna Gaon teaches that this portion is usually, although not this year, read on the week coinciding with the yahrzeit of Moses' death. God was, in a sense, mourning Moses' loss even as God was dictating the Torah to Moses. That is a powerful, profound image. The idea of a God who mourns, who can't bear to hear even the name of the deceased. The idea of a God who has the ability to anticipate and lessen God's own pain. A God who is just as vulnerable as we are. The commentator Cassuto, quoting an earlier source, suggests an entirely different explanation. Unlike the Gaon, who says the decision of omission was God's, Cassuto believes it was the work of Moses. So then the question becomes, why would Moses take himself out of the story? There's a parallel here with the holiday that just ended. As many of you may know, God's name is absent from the Megillah, from the Purim story. It is one of only 2 books in the Hebrew Bible to have this distinction of not mentioning God. And incidentally, Esther and this week's portion are usually read at the same time. Again, as with the missing tallis, there might not be a reason, or at least not a good one, connecting these 2 facts. But then again, maybe there is. Writing in the Torah, a woman's commentary, Dr. Lisa Grant suggests that in the case of Moses, his presence is momentarily diminished so that other leaders can step forward to serve the broader needs of the community. And our tradition famously teaches that when it comes to Purim, just because God isn't mentioned doesn't mean that God isn't there. You just have to look. That is a fitting reminder for us today in our world. But back to Moses. Who were these others that Moses was stepping back so that they could step forward? In the case of the Torah this week, they are Aaron, Moses' brother, and Aaron's descendants. It was them who would form the priesthood, the religious leaders of Israel. And the parsha that we read this week is all about preparing them for that role. But the Torah portion isn't just about giving them a spotlight. Until this point, Moses was the one and only authority in the eyes of the Israelites. Such a system, it was not sustainable. The purpose of the Exodus was not to give the Israelites a pharaoh of their own. It was to change the entire paradigm. It would not have been enough for Moses to install Aaron as his deputy, as a vice pharaoh. For Moses to truly share power, he needed to, in this moment, disappear. Aaron needed to have independent authority. The power needed to be shared. So what is the message, especially for those of us not currently campaigning for the role of Pharaoh? We live in a society and a culture that prizes success and winning. Even if we don't personally, the message we hear is that our goal and purpose in this world is to go through life collecting stuff. And I don't just mean material things. It's an entire mantra baked into our society. Whatever it is that you do, keep doing it until you reach the top. Of course, very few of us will ever get to the top, so it's a goal that will almost always be out of reach. But here's the message, at least one of the ones from our tradition. It's not about getting to the top. That isn't enough. Ambition, that is an attribute. That is not an ethic. We don't admire Moses because he became leader of the Israelites, or even because he led them successfully once he was. Why do we admire Moses? Because once he got up there, with a few exceptions, the question that guided him was not, how do I stay here? But instead, how does Israel stay here? Even when that meant he would have to step away. It's not just trivia that Moses' name isn't mentioned in this one Torah portion. That fact has led to a profound and, for me, beautiful teaching. We need to be about more than just ourselves. Ambition without purpose is vanity. We don't admire Moses because he became leader. We admire him for what he did once he was. And maybe, and most of all, what he didn't do. Back to the opening lines. Those opening words, Ve'ata tetzaveh et b'nei Yisrael, you shall command the children of Israel. The focus of the sentence goes away from Moses and not to Aaron or to the priesthood, but far bigger. It extends to all Israel. We become the focus. In his commentary, the Sfat Emet reads this verse as an instruction to Moses that he must bring the commandments, the mitzvot, into the souls of every Israelite so that they themselves become mitzvot. He goes on to offer an alternative translation for the standard blessing formula we know so well. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav. Normally, we translate that as something like, blessed is God, sovereign of the world, who sanctifies us with mitzvot and commands us, b'tzivanu. But the Sfat Emet suggests something else. Blessed is God, sanctifies us with mitzvot and makes us into mitzvot. What exactly does it mean to be a mitzvah? Rabbi Arthur Green teaches that to become a mitzvah, and thus to make God's dark light visible in the world through your own very being, that is the purpose of your life as a Jew. May we bring light and mitzvot into this world through ourselves. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will. Amen.